BBC Radio Scotland.
This is Billy Kay with the Complete Caledonian Imbiber, which celebrates the Scots' drouth for the great wines of Europe. Episode 2, my archive programme from 1994, Knee Deep in Claret.
Gae bring to me a pint of wine, and fair it in a silver tassie, that I may drink before I go a service stay, my bonny lassie.
To drink with us the new fresh wine that grew upon the river o' Rhine, fresh fragrant claret sous of France, of Angers and Orleans. William Dunbar and Robert Burns, separated by 300 years but relishing the Scots' exquisite taste for wine, something we've never been able to produce ourselves, but which, throughout history, our poets have celebrated and our guests have commented upon.
They are extremely fond of jovial company, and if they did not too often sacrifice to Bacchus the joys of a vacant hour, they would be the most entertaining people in Europe. But the goodness of their wine and the severity of their climate are indeed some excuse for them.
Captain Edward Topham, an English visitor to Edinburgh in the late 18th century, and me, Billy Kay, welcoming you to the Complete Caledonian Imbiber, the series celebrating our historic taste for ale, whisky, sherry, Madeira, port and claret, whose motto is, rarely dry, but aye drouthy. The Scots have had an influence in most of the world's vineyards, old and new. When Robert Louis Stevenson explored one of the first California vineyards, he found it was owned by a man Maclean from Greenock. With the Scots diaspora sending the wine home, a very Catholic approach to drink emerged, one very different from countries which grow and know only their own wine. Freddie Stimpson.
They're as parochial as they can possibly be, and far, far better. Someone with a breadth of vision and breadth of knowledge and breadth of taste, such as a wine drinker of this country who's had the whole range and array of the countries of the world as distinct. I'm not being anti-French or anti-German or anti-anybody else. I'm merely saying that they tend to be infinitely more parochial than our wine drinkers.
But while we were Catholic in taste with a choice of Mountain and Malaga, Bastardo and Burgundy, Muscadel and Malmsey, there is no doubt which was the national favourite, the red wine of Bordeaux. Writing around 1490, Sir Gilbert Hay describes its properties.
Claret wine is halesome to all complexions. Sick wines comforts the stomach and helps to the natural heat and the good digestion, and amends the wit and the mind of the man, and makes a man mair wise and sure in his wit with discretion and reason, and blithes the heart and makes good hue vermilion, and gars a man speak clearly and readily, and mony other profitable things does.
Cailean Maclean studied the rise of the Bordeaux vineyard at university and is co-author of the book Knee Deep in Claret.
If the length of association of any particular product were the only criterion used in defining it as, say, Scotland's national drink, then I would say that claret would have a much stronger claim than any other drink, including whisky. For example, it's almost exactly 500 years ago that we have the first record of whisky in Scotland. That was in the Exchequer Rolls of 1495. But in St Columba's biography, written by Adamnan, he makes reference to wine being in daily use in Iona for sacramental purposes, and that was in the 6th century. And he also records what was likely to be the Highlands' first transaction involving wine when St Columba set off for what they called then Land's Head, Kintyre, to meet sailors from Gaul. And 6 centuries later, still a couple of 100 years before whisky makes her first appearance, King Alexander III was pledging all the duties paid for 1 year at Berwick, which was then one of Scotland's foremost ports before it was stolen from us, as security for an account of over £2,000 for Bordeaux wine. That was in 1253. So our association with wine goes back a long way.
When the combined Franco-Scottish forces of the Auld Allies removed the English from their last toehold in this southwest part of France, one of the benefits which ensued was the granting of economic privileges to the Scots. The English were not amused.
Because he hath always been a useful confederate to France against England, he hath right of pre-emption, or first choice of wines in Bordeaux.
The privileges lasted till the 1670s, but by then the drink called the bloodstream of the Auld Allies could fool the end of the alliance and still be considered a Scottish staple. Besides, this ancient spirit of entente continues to our own day. Esme Johnston makes claret at Chateau de Sour, west of Bordeaux.
Scotland's a very sophisticated market. It's actually a much more sophisticated market than England is, because the history and the tradition goes back much longer, and the Scots over the last 200 years have had a much closer affinity to Bordeaux than the English have. And the English have always had a love-hate relationship with the French and the Bordelais, whereas the Bordelais and the Scots have a mutual respect for each other.
Do you ever play on that when you're negotiating here in Bordeaux?
Oh, always, yes, absolutely. I mean, there's a price for the English and a price for the Scots, and the price for the Scots is normally 5 to 10% below the price for the English.
By the middle of the 16th century, there was a small colony of Scots in Bordeaux organising the shipment of claret back to their homeland. And among them, we could name Alexander Bézet, which is Bizet, I think, who was a native of Aberdeen, and he was in Bordeaux in 1540, and there was also a Perth man called William Valentine there about the same time. Vineyards of Bordeaux were very much closer to Scotland than many of the other vineyards on the continent. It was fairly simple to take wine up the west coast of France and along the east coast of England into Leith particularly. There were other places producing wines in France which were equally acceptable to the Scottish palate at the time, say for example La Rochelle, but they were largely eclipsed by the growth of Bordeaux, and eventually Bordeaux became the main source of wine for Scotland in France.
The Scots wine shippers were joined by intellectuals like George Buchanan and, after the various Jacobite risings, by Scots political exiles who sipped claret and sang of their home.
The sun rises bright in France, and so sets he, but his tent the blank he had in my ain country, and bring to me a glass of wine, and sing to me some Scottish rhyme, that I may think on Auld Lang Syne and my ain country. The land o' sweet Bordeaux is pleasant for to see, but it's ne'er so sweet as the land I left and my ain country.
The merchants who settled were rewarded as vin Claret, a light rosé wine for knocking back, was transmuted into claret, the long-lived classical purple-red wine we know today. Among the Scots who settled and made their mark on the area from 1716 onward were the Johnstons. Jean-Marie Johnston is a négociant based at Château Malico in Pauillac, in the heart of the greatest fine wine area in the world. I asked him and his cousin Esme whether they displayed their Scottish origins when marketing wine.
You can see that easily by the labels we are using on the bottles, by our letterheads, and we carry on with the coat of arms and the crest, which is a spur and a phoenix. And at the bottom we have the St. Andrew's cross, which is coming from the very first origin of the Johnston family in the borders, because they were linked very closely to the Bruce family, because all the land they got was with services given to the Bruce in the very early days.
There are several Rue Johnstons and Boulevard Johnstons in Bordeaux, and it's a well-known name.
Any stories that you were brought up with, hearing about the Bordeaux side of the family?
The earliest one was actually during the French Revolution, when the Johnston of the time was somebody called David Johnston, and apparently there were 2 guillotines in France. There was one permanent one in Paris and one mobile one that used to travel around the countryside. And when it came to Bordeaux, the Johnston of the time stole the appropriate moving part and made the guillotine inoperable, so it had to go back to Paris again. And it's apparently saved 200 or 300 heads. I'm not sure if that's the real reason other Bordelais like the Johnstons or not, but it's probably something to do with it.
My grandfather's mother was Scottish as well, and they were all brought up in a very Scottish manner, because despite the fact they were, very well introduced and be very powerful in Bordeaux as being a wine merchant, they kept all their life linked to Scotland. And that's something which is very important, because even when my grandpa was young, he was wearing the kilt. And that's something that we have been keeping in the family as such as a tradition, because when I got married as well, that's something that I've been doing. I've been wearing a kilt for my wedding. So you see, it's a very strong link that we want to keep.
Do you also occasionally fly the flag?
Oh, sure, we do. And it's amazing, because every Vinexpo, which is happening every 2 years, we have a lot of customers coming from all around the world. And at the entrance of Chateau Malico, what we do is we have the two flags, the St. Andrews and the Lion. And you would not believe how many Scots are stopping here nearby saying, well, how come you have two flags? Well, it's easy. The Johnston are from Scottish origin, and we are very proud of it. So it's a sort of Scottish embassy. And a friend of mine in Scotland says, I am probably the best Scottish ambassador in the wine trade.
If the foreign traders on the Quai des Chartrons took the fame of claret round Europe, it was the wealthy Bordeaux parliamentarians and landowners who invested fortunes to raise the quality of the wine, fortunes recouped with the great prices named chateau wines were already fetching in northern Europe. With its blend of grapes and sophistication, claret is often called an intellectual wine. Now, one of the Graves vineyards of the 18th century, La Brede, was tended by none other than the philosopher Montesquieu. The family are still making fine wine. I spoke to the present Baron de Montesquieu about his famous forebear.
We have a few letters written to his friends. He used to write to Charles York, "Come to La Brede, you will teach me how to reason, and I shall teach you how to make good wine." He used to write to Lord Chesterfield, "I know not whether my wines owe their success to my books or my books to the quality of my wines." In fact, I think that this is a kind of joke. I'm quite sure that even if his wines were very good, the quality of his books was probably far better of the quality of the wine.
Our great philosopher and Francophile David Hume was also into claret. He developed a taste for it following a fit of depression as a youth, when his doctor recommended a stoical regime of long rides on rough country roads, anti-hysterical pills and a pint of claret per day. Ironically, most of it was smuggled claret, for after the Union, England's traditional Francophobia attempted to force us off claret and on to port. The success of the policy can be gauged by the knowledge that even those pillars of the establishment, the Scots judges, saw it as their Scottish patriotic duty to continue with claret as before.
With Herman, drinking was a virtue. He had a sincere respect for drinking, indeed a high moral approbation, and a serious compassion for the poor wretches who could not indulge in it, and with due contempt for those who could, but did not.
Because of the fair trading, as smuggling was called, claret was cheap, plentiful and available to all.
Claret seems to have been a terribly democratic drink, certainly in the south of Scotland. Everybody seemed to be drinking it, from those who simply wanted to go for a pint in one of the local houses to the High Court judges of Scotland. But in Auld Allies, there was a tremendous explosion of clubs, and the raison d'etre of some of these clubs was scarcely concealed. For example, there was the I-Foo Club, the Topers Club, the Muchkin and the Claret ones. But there were also some with a more political inclination. The National Club, the Anti-Union Club, the All Scots Club, No Surrender, Scotia's Pride, and the Never Give In. But despite their different aims and objectives, it seemed that claret was the drink that was consumed in all these clubs.
And in the clubs throughout the 18th century, poets like Alan Ramsay and Hamilton of Gilbertfield celebrated its joys, while James Boswell's diaries described its effects.
Get claret best keeps out the cold and drives awa the winter soon. It makes a man baith gash and bald, heaves his soul beyond the moon.
The dull draught drink makes me say douth. Oh, I can do's, but bar can youth. Yet set me in a claret house with folk that's chancy. My muse may lend me then a gowf to clear my fancy. Then Bacchus like I'd bawl and bluster, and all the muses bout me muster. Say merrily I'd squeeze the cluster and drink the grape. 'Twould gie my verse a brichter lustre and better shape.
Then fling on coals and ripe the ribs, beak the house baith butt and ben. The muchkin stoop at huds but dribs, then let's get out the tappet hen. Let me stay come as it thinks fit, only the present minute soothes on pleasure. Let's employ her wit and laugh at fortune's feckless puss.
November 1774. Dined with the Colonel at his lodgings, and as he was to be busy, just drank half a bottle of port. I went to Fortune's, found nobody in the house but Captain James Gordon of Ellen. He and I drank 5 bottles of claret and were most profound politicians. September 1779. It is wonderful what joy there is in excess. I stood it better today than yesterday.
The inimitable James Boswell in Edinburgh. In France, Esme Johnston has achieved his dream. He sold a wine company in England and bought a chateau, adding to the Johnston colony in Bordeaux.
We're walking down to the cave here.
And you can see here, Billy, the subsoil here, which is solid limestone, which is...
And it's solid rock.
Yeah, it's identical to sentimental here. And the vines have to grow through this. There's about a foot of topsoil and then solid limestone. And to be a good vine, life's all about a struggle.
There's a lizard there. Are they lucky?
Hopefully. Everything we do here is to restrict the yield rather than to increase it. You can see there's quite a change of temperature as we...
Dramatic from the heat out there.
The temperature down here is about 13 degrees, and it varies between summer and winter by about 2 degrees maximum. It's also quite humid. So this is where we keep the barrels. It's rather like an Egyptian tomb down here. It keeps the barrels and the woods moist. And when we first arrived here, I went right to the end, which is about a third of a mile down there, and it gets pretty narrow and claustrophobic, and I found somebody's sleeping bag in the far corner. I wouldn't spend the night down here.
Wow. Was there any barrels round about him?
The reason I ask is that our countrymen have been found enjoying themselves in Bordeaux cellars for centuries. James VI mentions a pedlar being transported thither by witchcraft. The idea obviously appealed, for 2 centuries later, when Burns came to write Tam O'Shanter, he found this story about a shepherd lad going home one evening in Alloway.
As he passed the kirk in the adjoining field, he fell in with a crew of men and women who were busy pulling the stems of the plant ragwort. He observed that as each person pulled a ragwort, he or she got astride of it and called out, "Up, horsey!" on which the ragwort flew off like Pegasus through the air with its rider. The foolish boy likewise pulled his ragwort and cried with the rest, "Up, horsey!" And strange to tell, away he flew with the company. The first stage at which the cavalcade stopped was a merchant's wine cellar in Bordeaux, where, without saying by your leave, they quaffed away at the best the cellar could afford, until the morning, foe to the imps and works of darkness, threatened to throw light on the matter and frighten them from their carousals. The poor shepherd lad, being equally a stranger to the scene and the liquor, heedlessly got himself drunk. And when the rest took horse, he fell asleep and was found so next day by some of the people belonging to the merchant. Somebody that understood Scotch, asking him what he was, he said he was such a one's heard in Alloway. And by some means or other getting home again, he lived long to tell the world the wondrous tale.
fellow Ayrshireman Rabbie Burns, who gave me the title of this programme with the immortal line,
And knee-deep in claret he'd die, herried yield, aye, knee-deep in claret he'd die, herried yield.
Thank you, Rabbie. Now, where's my ragwort? Up, horsey!
This is on 1993 red, which I'm just getting out of the tank.
I always love the way they foam up when they come out of the tank.
It's a pretty aggressive drink at the moment. What you're looking for in this is colour, fruit, tannin, and what I call grip, which is something that leaves a furry taste at the back of your mouth. It should be a very rough, aggressive wine. And if you drank more than about a glass of it, it would solve any digestion problems you might have.
Yes, good claret needs a few years in bottle to mature. The cellar of Chateau Lafite in Pauillac would do nicely. Eric Kohler is my chaperone.
Oldest bottle in this corridor is from the 18th century. The vintage is 1776.
1776.
Yes, we have
it's
also
about the time of the American Revolution, isn't it?
Yes,
1776.
yes, it is. That's true. We have 6 bottles of this vintage. The oldest bottle I have tasted is 45. It is just fantastic. If you don't see the vintage, you can't imagine it's a 45. It was 3 days ago.
Congratulations. And in the cellar there, I mean, it's a very atmospheric looking place. There's a fungus growing all over the bottles. They're just lying there in racks and they're lit by almost like candlelight. For wine lovers, this must be like a treasure trove. So who decides when an important vintage is going to be opened?
Mr. Eric de Rothschild, of course, yes.
In the working part of the cave, I watched the soutirage, a racking operation to leave the sediment or lees of the wine in the barrel. The final stage of this process is the collage, when the white of egg glides through the claret and clarifies it. How many eggs do they use at Lafite?
6,000?
6,000 eggs?
Between 6,000 and 8,000 perhaps.
And that you only use the white of the eggs. What happens to the yellow part of the egg?
I don't know. I don't know because it's the first year. I never asked me the question.
And with 8,000 yolks, there's an awful lot of omelettes and cakes made in the Médoc at the time of the collage. It's good to see something so old-fashioned as a candle.
Yes.
You wouldn't expect to see a candle. I mean, it's almost like decanting wine into a bottle.
Yes, it's a very old tradition.
The same process. This gentleman has a glass in his hand, and as the wine comes out of the barrel, he lifts it up, glances it through the glass against the candle, just to check the clarity of it. And it's a magnificent sight. If I remember Walter Scott's son-in-law describing it as foaming like the cream of strawberries. Well, that's exactly what it is here. Glass against the candle. Glass against the candle. I wish I had wine like this to decant myself. The quote I was recalling there was from J. G. Lockhart's Peter's Letters to his Kinsfolk, in which he describes Scotland at the turn of the 19th century, visiting the older generation like writer Henry Mackenzie and publishers the Constables.
I have seldom seen a more luxurious display. We had claret of the most exquisite Lafite flavour, which foamed in the glass like the cream of strawberries and went down as cool as the nectar of Olympus. At that time, the only liquor was claret, and this they sent for just as they wanted it, huge pewter jugs, or as they called them, stoups of claret, being just as commonly to be seen travelling the streets of Edinburgh in all directions then as the mugs of Muir and Barclay are in those of London now. If I were to take the evening I spent in listening to its history as a fair specimen of the old time, I should almost be inclined to reverse the words of the laureate and to say, of all places and all times of earth, did fate grant choice of time and place to men. Wise choice might be there Scotland, and there then.
Of course, fine claret drinking didn't disappear, but it did go higher up the social scale in the 19th and early 20th century. Judges and aristocrats could still about afford it. Happily, with the democratisation of wine drinking, we're getting back to our vinous roots, and claret quaffing is on the increase once again. One fortunate gentleman I know, however, has actually tasted the wine drunk in the Golden Age. I hope you'll join me in the next Complete Caledonian Imbiber in the wilds of the Upper Douro in Portugal. But meanwhile, I'll leave you to slake your drouth with Freddie Stimpson, discovering the long-hidden secrets in the cellar at Glamis Castle.
I can only say that I had a torch and some decent clothes on, and I was in a place that had no lights whatsoever, but I had the original feeling of being something like Cartwright in the pyramids, because I had discovered Ali Baba's cave or Tutankhamun's tomb, because to my right was a bin with 50-odd magnums of Chateau Lafite. And when I tell you that it was Chateau Lafite 1870, we are talking about pre-phylloxera claret in magnum, and that other bins had Mouton Rothschild, others had Léoville Lascars. But I came back up with eyes which were alight with total disbelief. I was duly given, as a gesture, some magnums by the Earl because, as he said, there was no way he was going to offer me money. But the joy is that we actually drank in our own home some 6 magnums of 1870. We drank with friends, but they were very chosen friends, as you might well imagine.
What did it taste like 100 years on?
There is nothing that I can correlate it to, save that I do recall the spiciness, the unbelievably exotic, even erotic flavour. The concept earlier on when I spoke of Ali Baba, this was like a genie coming out of a bottle. Bouquet, perfume, come all Araby. And the joy of the aftertaste, which, if I was to be asked, what is it that distinguished it from today's wines, it's very simply that the taste went on and on, was a taste that you could dream on.
Can you still remember it?
Yes, I do, vividly. And I break my heart that I've no more.
Gae, bring to me a pint of wine, and fill it in a silver tassie, that I may drink before I go. At service stay, my bonny lassie.